In order to make baba ganoush, we have to take 2 large eggplants and prepare them. Cut off the ends because those are where the harder bits are. Cut them in half, and what we'll end up doing is putting some olive oil on them just to keep it from drying out. Putting them face down on that tray in the background, and they're going to go in the oven for about 40 minutes in order to cook. So when we cook the baba ganoush, it gets caramelized and it gets a little bit smoky and it gets super soft. Traditionally, you would do this just by roasting them over the fire, but we're going to use our stove because it's a little bit easier and a little bit safer. Doing all of this lets the baba ganoush be nice and silky smooth when you mix it all together, but it also gives the baba ganoush some of its characteristic taste. So let's prepare the rest of the eggplant, and then we will go ahead and pop it in the oven. The eggplant lies face down so that the bottom, which is oiled, can get nice and caramelized. Okay, so these eggplants will go in the oven and they will be cooked at 450 degrees for about 40 minutes. And then they should be nice and tasty for us. Now that the eggplant is nice and cooked and soft, you want to scrape out all of the eggplant from the inside of the skin, and we especially want to get the crispy brown outside of the face. We do not want the skin. The skin is a little bit bitter, and so we want all the tasty stuff inside, but not the skin. The skins will, we're just to kind of hold it together while we cooked, and we can get rid of them. We put them in a strainer because we want the liquid to drain out, because we don't need that much liquid in the final dish. Now that we have all of the insides of the eggplants and we've let them drain for a bit, it's time to start putting it together. We've got to get rid of all of that liquid. We don't want it in the final mix. It would be too wet, too liquidy. Garlic, lemon, mix them together. Okay, tahini will make it nice and smooth. And then we add the final ingredients: parsley, cumin, salt. Okay, at this stage, it's pretty much just a process of mixing everything together. Once the garlic and lemon juice are added into the eggplant, it's just mix, mix, mix. You want to get it nice and smooth. Break up the eggplant, add the tahini that makes it whiter and smooth. Okay, mix it all together, some salt, some cumin, some parsley, and just mix, mix, mix. To make pita, we need a half a cup of warm water, 2 teaspoons of active dry yeast, a half a teaspoon of sugar, 3 cups of flour, 1.5 cups all-purpose, 1.5 cups whole wheat, a teaspoon of salt, and 2 tablespoons of olive oil. We use the yeast to give the pita some volume by rising. And of course, as we learned in the past, in order to use yeast, you have to feed the yeast. So the first part of making a pita is to pour yeast into the bottom of the bowl, add some sugar. I use coconut sugar, but you can use regular white sugar if you'd rather. And then we add some water. In this case, I'm using warm water, not hot, warm. Warm water will help the yeast be more active more quickly. Hot water might kill it, cold water and the yeast wouldn't be very active. So warm water, whisk it all together, and then basically we have to wait. Um, we add a little bit of flour to make it a little bit dough, to give them a little bit more to feed on, but then we let it sit for about 15 minutes. You should see it rise and bubbles should start to form. If you don't see those things, it means your yeast was not active, and you will need to start over with some new yeast. We just saw that the dough rose, so we know that the yeast is active. You can see that when I scrape across it, it leaves a mark. So now it is time to actually make the dough. The yeast is alive. Add half a cup of whole wheat and 1 cup of white flour. There's already 1 cup of flour in the bowl that we fed the yeast, so we don't need to add 1.5, just 1 more cup. Some sugar, some salt. We don't need sugar, but some salt, and the oil, 2 tablespoons of oil. Okay, once those are in there, mix them around. We want the wet ingredients to be mixed together before we add the dry. So just stir it together. Should come together fairly quickly. And then we add the dry the dry flour. You can see I'm just stirring this with a chopstick to start. I want to get the water distributed across the flour. You can see it's starting to clump up a bit now. So the first job of making this dough is just to kind of get all of the flour wet, all of the water evenly distributed. We'll be doing a couple of steps to make sure that the dough comes together, and the first step is just to bring everything together. Once it mostly comes together, you start to knead it. Okay, so we press it together. Some parts will feel dry, some parts will feel more wet, and we want it all to come together. So you can see I'm just pressing and turning and pressing and turning, and we're slowly working the dough to bring it together. Now, one of the reasons we do this is because we want gluten to form. The gluten are these long, springy chains that give kind of the bread its elasticity, lets it rise up. And we have to form the gluten by kind of working the dough and kneading it. Okay, and you want gluten in there, but not so much that it springs back together into a hard puck. It's a balance. So we're going to knead this for a few minutes, and then we'll let it rest, and then we'll knead it, we'll let it rest. We do that a couple of times, and that will be our dough. So let's just watch the process of kneading the dough. Once the dough comes together in the bowl, you take it out and knead it for 2 or 3 minutes on a clean floured surface. You've got to do this just to get all of the moisture even across the dough. And then we can put it in a container and cover it for about 10 minutes. We've got to let the gluten rest so that we can knead it again. And we do that 2 times. So knead it, rest, knead it, rest. If you look carefully, you can see that I'm just trying to keep it in a ball shape. I don't want to fold it over anymore. I'm trying to just get this even. Once I do that and it forms a nice ball, we're going to let this dough rest for an hour. When you let it rest for an hour, it relaxes the gluten and it will also rise. Now that the hour has passed, you can see that the dough has risen a bunch. This dough is enough to make 8 pitas. I'm going to cook 4 now and save 4 for another day. So in order to do that, I have to cut this dough. Check this out. You can actually see it's starting to kind of deflate now that I'm touching it. But I'm going to cut it in half, save half, and then cut that half into 4 pieces. So that will be half of the dough, 4 pieces. Save that part for later, and then cut this dough in half, and then each of those pieces in half for 4 pitas. You want to take each of these pieces and roll it into a ball. Again, we're trying not to fold it over because we don't want layers. We just want it to be a round shape so that when we roll it out, it will be nice and flat. Now we take each ball and we roll it into a large flat shape, kind of like a pancake or a tortilla. This is the shape that the pita will get to be. One thing you'll find, or I find, is I have a hard time getting them to puff up. That's a skill I just haven't fully developed. So my pitas will end up being flat, not puffy with a hollow inside, which is fine. They're still very tasty, make a great sandwich. But nice and flat, 8 or 9 inches around, and then if you can, let it rest for a couple of minutes so the gluten can relax. It will make it easier to cook and more softer when you do actually cook it. The pita should go on a hot griddle. Cast iron is best because it heats nice and evenly. Nice and hot. Put it on there, cook it for about 30 seconds. It should start to puff up a little bit, be nice and toasty. Flip it over, cook it for another minute to up to 2 minutes, depending on how hot your griddle is and how thick the pita is. But this is a pretty quick process. If you watch carefully, you can see it is swelling up a little bit. It is getting some puffiness to it, but it doesn't, like I said, puff up and get that nice, beautiful pita pocket. It's a skill I need to keep working on. Now that the pita is done, I actually wanted to check to see if I was able to get it to split. And there's space in the center, but it's not going to make a nice, easy pocket. So I will just use it kind of like a tortilla. Okay, you can also cut it into sections and chunks so you can dip to eat the baba ganoush. But seeing as I was having a full meal, I decided to take that baba ganoush and spread it on the pita. Add some shredded carrot salad that I had, and I actually added some kimchi I bought from a local kimchi maker, Taigu Kimchi. That's probably my favorite kimchi that you can get around here, and just made a delicious and tasty sandwich.